Badger fans, it's Gardner Fickle back with Badgers Analytics. We're talking a particular camp storyline that I really want to dive into for you, related to Tyler Van Dyke and kind of the mobility that he's flashed through the first 2 weeks at down in Platteville. We'll talk about kind of how he fits into the mold with Phil Longo's quarterbacks and kind of what he's had to work with in his time at North Carolina and with Tanner Mordecai last year. Dive into that from a rush yards over expectation standpoint and really dive deeper into that model and talk through, through the lens of Tyler Van Dyke. Then we'll also talk sack pressure ratio, kind of another aspect of quarterback mobility, and how Tyler Van Dyke performed through that lens. And then we'll talk, 24 expectations from TVD and, what his level of mobility can add to the Wisconsin Badgers offense now that it's looking like he's going to be QB1 to start off the season. So, diving in to episode 1 of the camp storyline is really Tyler Van Dyke's mobility. And he's really flashed in these first 2 weeks. A lot of reports coming out of camp that he's made some splash plays, some really explosive plays in the RPO game. And it sounds like from the reports that they've also been working, a quarterback option game, and maybe we'll see some heavier doses of quarterback design runs out of Phil Longo in 2024. There was a bit sprinkled in with Mordecai and Brighton Locke in kind of the quarterback draw. Didn't see a ton of quarterback option, although obviously the reports out of camp is that they're drilling that pretty heavily or so in the first week of camp. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like in 2024. But obviously, you're here to dig into the numbers. So what we're looking at here, right, is this run yards over expectation per rush, and then kind of across EPA per rush. And so really what we want to highlight here is kind of in that top right is Phil Longo and a lot of his quarterbacks throughout the years. Obviously, Tanner Mordecai, his SMU years, but Sam Howell, Drake May, up in that top right-hand quadrant, right? So high EPA per rush and high rush yards over expectation per rush. So Longo has definitely had some really athletic quarterbacks who have done a really good job of making plays with their legs. And what you'll notice there is in 2021 and 2023, probably the two better years. Obviously, 2021 for Tyler Van Dyke was his best year overall. But 2023, he flashed the legs and had his highest rush yards over expectation per rush in 2023. And even better than some of the years you got out of Phil Longo got out of Sam Howell and Drake May. So really strong performance from a RYOE standpoint. But obviously you can see down there in 2022, you saw the exact opposite end of the coin from TBD there. So what can we expect from Van Dyke in 2024? The second half of this is, right, RYOE per rush, it tells only half the story. And what you really have to look at is kind of on an efficient frontier. So on the x-axis here, we have the RYOE per rush, right? So that measure of efficiency, if you go back to my other video, I really dive into RYOE as an advanced analytics statistic, right? It's kind of taking all of these factors into account, down, distance, where we're at on the field, where we're at from, what point in the game is it, and how much are we down, and kind of building all of those factors into this model. You can expect, a given yards gained given that situation. And basically the residuals off of that is your rush yards over or under expectation, right? So under would be a negative value here in RYOE to measure quarterback, running back performance in their rushing attempts. And so that's kind of the left and right of this chart here, but the y-axis is basically the total rush yards over expectation. So you don't want to be under this red line, because what that means is you're really efficient, but you're not really doing that at a high clip, right? So if you think about a 3-point shooter, a guy who shoots 45% from 3-point, but he only takes 5 3-pointers in a year, not necessarily someone you would consider a great shooter. Now you look at Sam Howell um, in 2021, really strong rush yards over expectations, 2.25 yards per rush over expectation to, basically the model of all rushing attempts. And this data is from 2016 through 2023 that I layered into the new model. And he did that at a very high rate, obviously getting 300 total yards over expectation to kind of the average of the model, so to speak. So really strong results. And you can see pretty much everybody that Longo was dealing with in his time at North Carolina was above that. So Sam Howell in 2020, Drake May in 2022, really efficient runs, and they did so at a high clip. And what you can see is obviously Braden Locke and Tyler Van Dyke, actually pretty strong rush yards over expectation, but they didn't do it at a high enough clip to kind of break this red line, which is what I would call the efficient frontier of QB runs, or even running in general, whether you're a running back or a quarterback in this model. This data has both. You want to be above that line. Obviously, the top right-hand quadrant of this graph is really where you want to be. And so Sam Howell in 2020, in 2021, and Drake May in 2022 for Phil Longo definitely filled that void for Phil Longo. So obviously, we just pare this down just to the running backs. You can kind of see in 2023, Tanner Mordecai was right on that line. So obviously wasn't as prolific as a runner that Braden Locke and Tyler Van Dyke showed in 2023, but definitely was much more active with his legs than Van Dyke in this kind of scenario where you're looking at rush yards over expectation. But then obviously, again, really highlighting the North Carolina quarterbacks for Phil Longo, and really that aspect of the quarterback run game is pretty important to Phil Longo's offense, right? A lot of RPO action. If you think about the heavy mesh or the long mesh, it's not Wake Forest type of stuff, but definitely on a majority of the runs last year, there was some sort of elongated mesh, for lack of a better term. And I don't know how many of those are where the quarterback actually has the option to pull and run. I would imagine on all of them he does. Wouldn't really make a lot of sense to necessarily fake that mesh if the quarterback doesn't have the option to run it. But obviously that's a huge part of Phil Longo's offense. And obviously Sam Howell, Drake May took really strong advantage of that and broke off a lot of runs over expectations and a lot of yards to the offense to move the chains and to make those offenses quite prolific for Phil Longo. We didn't quite get that out of Tanner Mordecai. Braden Locke actually flashed a little bit better from the times he did pull and run. And there's some examples thinking of the Ohio State game where he pulled and ran kind of early in that second half and made some really good plays to extend drives and kind of push the ball down the field and score some points on a pretty stout Ohio State defense. Need more of that with that same level of efficiency. And obviously Tyler Van Dyke showed pretty elite levels of efficiency in those types of situations in 2023. But really, we need him to get into this box, right? Is to show that level of efficiency. And the more times he's just going to run, the less yards over expectations he's probably going to get, unless he's, going to run the ball like Sam Howell or Drake May. I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to expect that in 2024, but shifting above the efficient frontier, this red line, where he's getting 100, maybe 150 yards over expectation, is going to be pretty significant across the full year, which means he's efficient and he's pulling the ball and running, keeping those defensive ends, outside linebackers from crashing down in those inside zones. Options of the RPO game. That's going to be pretty important for us in 2024. So he's shown he can, make explosive plays over, what's expected in given situations, but he needs to do it at a higher clip. Because obviously you look at it, and I brought actually Daquan Finn into this data, as you can think back to, late December, it was kind of Daquan Finn or Tyler Van Dyke. I was very much so in the Daquan Finn camp. And really it had all to do with his ability to use his legs. And obviously in 2021 through 2023, Daquan Finn ran the ball quite extensively, much more in kind of the realm of, kind of get my face out of there, Drake May and Sam Howell in 2022 and 2021. They carried the ball quite often for Phil Longo, and that's something that Daquan Finn was even going to do above Tanner Mordecai. Obviously, you can see from his SMU days, he definitely did step it up in terms of the amount of carries in 2023 from Mordecai, but definitely lost in terms of efficiency. So you look at Tyler Van Dyke in 2021, obviously 22 and 23, his mobility really dropped off. And you heard Luke Fickell kind of comment that you're going to need him to run more like 2021 and actually even more so than that, I would imagine, in Phil Longo's offense for it to work the way he ideally wants it to. If you kind of use Sam Howell and Drake May in 21 and 22 as kind of the mold, that's really the type of quarterback rush game we're going to need from Tyler Van Dyke. And so if he can, maintain some level of efficiency that he saw in 2023 and 2021, where he was above 1 yard per, around 3/4 of a yard over expectation in 2021 on some pretty significant volume, we're going to need to kind of be in that range or even closer to 1.5 yards over expectation, and definitely in the over 50 carries from Tyler Van Dyke if we're going to see some success from our run game and the RPO action that Phil Longo really likes to utilize in his offense. So when you add Daquan Finn into that mix, obviously that's why I was so high on him, is he carries the ball quite often and has some pretty strong efficiency, not near the level of efficiency of Drake May, Sam Howell, but definitely given how much he ran the ball, a very mobile quarterback who could do a lot of things in Phil Longo's offense. And that's a big reason why I liked him. But obviously there's still opportunity for Tyler Van Dyke, and this is rush yards over expectation per rush, just looking at it by down. So obviously in first and third down situations, Tyler Van Dyke didn't necessarily get the same level of efficiency over expectation. But you look at second down and fourth down situations, his RYOE was better than, or at least in second down, it was better than Daquan Finn. So, and then when you look at second down, definitely in the realm of Sam Howell and Drake May, the gray and light blue bars there. So the signs are there, the flashes are there for Tyler Van Dyke, and obviously through the first 2 weeks of camp, he's flashed that tremendously enough for all of the media members at practice seeing it with their eyes to call it out and to highlight that for us. But obviously with that efficiency, you need the carries to go along with it. And obviously Daquan Finn was carried the ball the most out of any of these quarterbacks. And so, I was significantly high on him. Obviously, he's obviously not with the football team, so don't really need to beat a dead horse with that, but we're going to need to see Van Dyke's carries across the downs kind of get up to the level of 25 to 40 carries across each down over the course of a 12, 13 game season. I don't think that's really out of the question. That's 4 or 5 rushes per down per game, 8 to 12. I don't see that as a really heavy workload, especially when you think of those ends don't really start crashing down as much when you bust out some really explosive plays, some really high rush yards over expectation. They're going to stay home. And that opens things up for Tawi Walker, Ches Malusi, Jackson Aker, Cade Yakamele, the freshman running backs to really create those explosive plays for themselves. And now you kind of put that defense in a big bind. Now they start to load up the box, and now that RPO isn't a pull for Tyler Van Dyke to run, but to hit those glance routes, those bubble plays, smoke screens, and really you start to see the Phil Longo offense come to be what we really expected out of it in 2023, where the defense is picking its poison. It can't really take away everything from the Phil Longo offense. But I think it's really predicated on the quarterback being able to put the outside linebacker defensive end in conflict. And then if the defense wants to really stop the run on those early downs, load the box up, and that's when you can get Will Pauling, Trechka Kahuna, Bryson Green into open space out on the boundaries. And now you're going to see some real explosive aspects of this offense. So, right, he needs to get the carries up and maintain his level of efficiency. So obviously he worked on his body in the offseason, running 20 plus miles per hour, all those things that you like to see, right? Those boxes are being checked in the offseason in camp. We're going to have to see it on the field in 2024. Because obviously, right, you take the efficiency, you take the carries, and you kind of add those two together. And that's where you get the total RYOE. That's where you see Sam Howell, Drake May did a lot of work on first and second downs, right? On those read options, RPO actions, right? The defensive end crashes down. They were going to rip it and run for 8, 10, 12, 15 yards and really take advantage of the defense crashing down. Van Dyke obviously showed some flashes from a second down standpoint, but we're going to need to see that the total RYOE get up into, over 50. I'd like to see that on first and second down from Tyler Van Dyke. If he can get, 100 yards over expectation over the course of the season, I think that's going to bode real well for the Wisconsin offense. Going to add that extra layer that Phil Longo was missing in 2023. Obviously, Mordecai flashed with his legs, but I don't necessarily think outside of the Purdue game where he was really adept at kind of making those pull reads and really making things happen with his legs outside of kind of that quarterback design game. Really needs to come through the RPO game in my eyes. And then, right, so that's really the quarterback rush, RPO, QB design run game. There's another aspect to quarterback mobility that, and really maybe it's less so mobility, but kind of the combination of your mobility and your awareness and QB IQ, and that's sack to pressure rate, right? So if you think about sack rate in a vacuum, it doesn't really tell you as much about a quarterback's ability, right? Did the offensive line just open him up where he had no ability to avoid? But you can kind of see more of a measure of a quarterback's ability, kind of looking at it on an efficient frontier again of if your pressure rate is going up, you should expect not to avoid all of those pressures over the course of a year and through a season, which is what we're looking at here. But obviously, Tyler Van Dyke was at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of pressures faced. So that's also probably when you look at time to throw and processing and making those decisions, he wasn't putting himself in positions where he was pressured very often. And that could be getting the ball out quick. But in the situations where he was pressured, and you look at from 2023, obviously, or 2021, is the green dot, right? Redshirt freshman, fairly low pressure rates when looking at kind of the lexicon of quarterbacks here in this data set, and fairly high sack rate, over 6%. But then going into 2022, increased pressure rate, but his sack rate dropped significantly and below that kind of efficient frontier. So obviously getting more adept at avoiding sacks when facing pressure, whether that's getting rid of the ball, which may have happened in 2022. Obviously, interception rate ticked up in 2022. So, avoiding sacks by throwing interceptions definitely isn't the way to go. But avoiding sacks is definitely a very highly correlated skill to quarterback success when you look at, offense in general, but in looking at how a quarterback translates to higher levels of play, sack to pressure rate, and being below this kind of dotted line is definitely where you want to be if you're trying to make it to the NFL or just to be a good quarterback in general. And then obviously from 2022 to 2023, pressure rate dropped a bit, but obviously so did his sack rate. And he was one of the best quarterbacks from a sack to pressure rate ratio. So he's gotten better through his years. Obviously, the interceptions maybe haven't gotten better through his time as a quarterback, but he's avoiding pressure and getting a little bit more adept at maybe using his mobility to be the most advantageous for himself. Obviously, in this situation, it's about avoiding sacks when faced with pressure, what we're looking at here. But obviously in 2023, when we look at the rush yards over expectation, very efficient when he did pull the ball and run. So some pretty good signs when you think about Van Dyke from an analytics perspective, showing his mobility in the quarterback run game, but also at avoiding sacks, which is, as analytics has become more prevalent in the correlations that have been made to quarterback play and offensive play in general, avoiding sacks is a very significantly valued skill, more so than maybe in past. So the fact that he's very good at avoiding pressure and avoiding those pressures turning into sacks is a very, very good thing for the Wisconsin offense in 2024. And when you look at it from a game-by-game basis, obviously in 2021 and 2022 saw when he did face a lot of pressure, some pretty high sack rates, right? Young player in 2021. Obviously 2022 was a very tumultuous year for Tyler Van Dyke. But when you look at those red dots in 2023, his sack rate was pretty consistent, even across, the pressure continuum. You look at, Louisville seeing upwards of 35% plus pressure rates, but keeping that sack rate below 5%, even below 2.5%. Is very, very good mobility and avoidance of pressure turning into sacks from Tyler Van Dyke. And that's really, really good news for Wisconsin football. So to kind of conclude, showed some really strong flashes from a RYOE standpoint. Going to need to see that at a higher clip. Going to need to see that in the RPO game on first and second down when those ends crash, and maybe when the end is maybe peaking to be able to rip those off and make some big plays when the ends are crashing down, or when the opportunities present himself. He's got to take advantage, and he's got to take advantage at a high clip. And then when pressure does present itself, which it's going to do, there's not going to be situations where we're avoiding pressure, even with a very veteran-laden offensive line. There's going to be times where there's going to be pressure, and we're going to need to see what he's flashed here, avoiding those pressures from turning into sacks. Keeping ourselves ahead of the chains is going to be very important, especially when we're talking these games against Alabama, Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, some really stout defenses historically. And obviously with Oregon, with Dan Lanning, obviously defensive coordinator at Georgia, right? These are going to be some tough tests, and we're going to need to see him flash in the quarterback run game, in the RPO game, and avoid those pressures when they do come. And he's flashed it, and definitely from a sack to pressure ratio, he's shown very consistent ability to avoid those pressures from turning into sacks. Got to turn those flashes from a RYOE standpoint into, much higher volume, with not a lot of drop in efficiency. We're going to need to see that. Sounds like through the first couple weeks of camp, that's something we should, fairly reasonably expect. We're going to absolutely need to expect it if we want to have an outperformance to 7-6, right? If we want to get into 8-4, 9-3 type of levels, stealing off some wins versus Iowa or Penn State, Oregon at home, Alabama at home, USC on the road, getting some of those wins, we're going to need to see Tyler Van Dyke really shine in the quarterback run game and avoid those pressures like he has been. Having gotten into the defense, that'll be episode 2 of Camp Storylines. Hopefully that'll be out maybe Sunday night. I'll get that out for you. But the headline there is run stuffers and QB hunters. That's kind of what we need out of this Wisconsin defense. Something we've shown historically, but didn't necessarily show that in 2023. So I'll dive into a lot of the analytics around that in episode 2 of this series. But that's it for Badgers analytics. Follow me on Gardner Fickle, like, subscribe, comment. We can, discuss all of these aspects in the comments below. I'm more than happy to engage with you guys and talk through, RYOE from a deeper standpoint. But as we get into the season, I'll be much more active on Twitter. So go follow me there, Gardner Fickle, on Twitter. And more to come from these types of videos in Badgers analytics. Kind of share this information with you this way, a little more interactive, get a little bit more deep into all of these things than the written form that you may be used to from me. So signing off, hopefully I'll be back with another video just related to the defensive storylines through camp. Out Sunday is my hope. So have a good one, and I'll see you later.